It was supposed to be a quiet return home, a day early, with no fanfare, just the simple, understated comfort of familiar walls and the woman I called my wife. But sometimes, life doesn't wait for the curtain to rise before it reveals the brutal truth of the play you've been starring in, without knowing the script. What I, Mason Gray, saw when I walked through that front door didn't just end a chapter of my life. It unraveled the entire book. And it all started with silence. A key that no longer fit the lock of the life I thought I had built. The nurse's smile was polite, practiced, but it didn't quite reach her eyes as she handed me the discharge papers, the crinkle of the paper sounding unnaturally loud in the sterile hallway. "You're good to go, Mr. Gray." The doctor signed off early, she said, her voice carrying that professional detachment I had grown used to over the last few days. "Your recovery is ahead of schedule, which is excellent news." I gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, though the dull, rhythmic ache in my chest reminded me that I wasn't quite whole yet. 3 nights in a hospital bed after a significant cardiac procedure. Nights spent listening to machines hum their monotonous tunes. Fluorescent lights flickering above like dying stars. And not a single visit from my wife, Elena Cross. She had texted once, a brief, sterile message claiming that hospitals made her anxious. She said the smell of antiseptic turned her stomach, that seeing me hooked up to monitors was too much for her sensitive disposition. But standing there on the curb, waiting for a cab, I knew what hurt wasn't the excuse itself. It was the silence, the profound absence, the empty hours where love should have shown up and simply didn't. I told myself not to overthink it, fighting the cynicism that was trying to take root. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she just didn't know how to deal with the reality of my mortality. Still, somewhere beneath the gauze and the fresh stitches, something deep inside me had already begun to detach. A survival mechanism kicking in before I even knew I was in danger. The cab ride home was quiet, the city outside moving like a blurred watercolor painting. But my thoughts were slower, heavy like lead. I thought about the way sunlight hit our kitchen floor in the morning, about the specific smell of Elena's perfume lingering on the throw pillows, about the comfort of our bed. I wondered if she'd be surprised to see me home early. Maybe she'd smile that brilliant smile I hadn't seen in months. Maybe she'd cry with relief. As the car pulled into the driveway, that gentle fantasy didn't just fade, it cracked. Elena's car was already there, parked not straight, but haphazardly across the bricks. The tires angled sharply, as if she had rushed in and never looked back. That wasn't like her. Elena prided herself on appearances, on order, on everything being picture perfect for the neighbors. I stared at the car a second too long, a dull weight pressing against my sternum, one knot caused by surgery, the other by a rising dread. I paid the fare, stepped out, and lifted my overnight bag, the strap digging into my shoulder as I moved toward the door. The house was still. Lights off downstairs, no music, no smell of dinner cooking, only a dim, pulsing glow emanating from upstairs. I didn't call out. I didn't announce my arrival with the cheerful, "Honey, I'm home." Something told me not to. Something deeper than suspicion. An instinct honed years ago in dangerous places told me to stay quiet. I climbed the stairs, the creaking of the wood beneath my feet sounding louder than usual in the oppressive silence, and stopped outside our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to see a slice of the room. The light inside cast a warm but distorted hue across the hallway floor. I pushed the door gently, almost hoping it would be empty, hoping I was just paranoid. But it wasn't. Elena was there, and so was a man I had never seen before. They were tangled together in the bed we had bought 5 years ago. The one she had once joked was too firm. The one we had chosen after testing half the showroom to find the perfect compromise. Her laughter, light, breathless, and entirely carefree, cut through me sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. The sheets were pulled halfway over them, a chaotic mess of white linen. My pillow had been tossed aside, landing on the floor like discarded trash. The nightstand still held our wedding photo, tilted at an odd angle, as if it were watching the whole thing unfold in stunned silence. A witness to the desecration. I didn't move. I didn't gasp. I didn't speak. The world had gone completely, terrifiedly quiet. My breath was shallow, constrained by the healing ribcage and the sudden lack of air in the room. The pain wasn't explosive. It was hollow. A cavernous ache that started somewhere in my spine and echoed through my chest, vibrating against the fresh scars. They didn't see me. Not yet. They were too lost in their moment, too sure that the inconvenient husband was safely tucked away in a hospital bed miles away. 10 seconds passed, maybe more. Time seemed to fold in on itself, stretching and compressing all at once. Then I stepped back, slowly, carefully. No anger, no drama, no screaming match that would alert the neighbor. I walked down the stairs with the same stillness I used to navigate minefields overseas. I didn't slam the front door. I closed it with a soft click. I walked back to the waiting cab, which I hadn't realized was still idling, the driver likely checking his phone. He glanced up, surprised to see me return so quickly. "Everything okay, buddy?" "Forgot something?" he asked, his eyes scanning my pale face in the rearview mirror. My voice was low, barely audible, stripped of all emotion. "Drive," I said. He hesitated, hand hovering over the gear shift. "Where to?" "Back to the hospital." I looked back at the house one last time, the upstairs window glowing with the lie I could no longer live in. "Downtown," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "Just get me downtown." And as the car pulled away from the home that no longer felt like mine, I didn't look back again. I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around me. Not the silence of peace, but of betrayal so deep, so sharp, that words would only weaken it. This wasn't grief. Not yet. This was the moment just before the storm, when everything is unbearably still. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkouds the best memories on Maidlin Willistif Skepton. The city blurred past the window as the cab slid silently through the midday traffic. But my mind was sharper than it had been in days. The physical pain in my chest from the surgery was nothing compared to the quiet, cold burn building inside me now. There was no fury, no trembling rage that usually accompanies such a discovery. Just a deep, pulsing clarity. Something had snapped back into place the moment I saw Elena cross with that stranger in our bed. The man she had become entangled with wasn't the issue anymore. The issue was the woman I had married, and the realization that she wasn't worth another second of heartbreak. But that didn't mean she would walk away untouched. "Take me downtown," I told the driver again, my voice steady. 20 minutes later, we pulled up in front of a modest but familiar brick building, tucked between two towering high-rises. I stepped out slowly, my overnight bag still slung over my shoulder, the hospital bracelet barely cut from my wrist. I didn't bother fixing my hoodie or checking the dark circles under my eyes. None of it mattered now. Not my appearance, not my image, only the outcome. Carter Brooks had been my friend for years, an old buddy from the days when I fixed computers on the side while transitioning out of the military. Carter had since become one of the sharpest attorneys in the city, a man who knew how to bury opponents in paperwork. And he owed me more than a few favors. When I walked into his office unannounced, the receptionist barely had time to stand up before I was at his door. Carter looked up from behind his mahogany desk, genuinely startled. "Mason, you're supposed to still be in the hospital," he said, half rising from his chair. I closed the door gently behind me, the latch clicking with a finality that echoed in the room. "Plans changed," I said simply. Carter motioned to the seat across from him, his brow furrowing as he took in my pale complexion. "What happened? You look like hell." I sat down without a word, reached into my bag, and pulled out a thick, nondescript folder. I placed it on the table with care, like setting down a loaded weapon. "She's been cheating," I said flatly. "I saw them in our bed today. Elena and some guy." Carter blinked, his professional mask slipping for a second. I didn't get his name. I didn't need to. My voice was calm, measured. Too calm. It was the kind of calm that made men like Carter nervous. I tapped the folder once. "Everything you need is in there." Carter opened the folder slowly, flipping through page after page of bank statements, property deeds, signed trust documents, power of attorney forms, private account summaries, and a quiet trail of financial restructuring. His eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. "You already moved everything," Carter said, glancing up at me with a mix of shock and admiration. "Months ago." I nodded once. "The house, the business, the savings, transferred, consolidated, locked. She still thinks she has access to all of it." Carter sat back in his chair, exhaling sharply through his nose. "She has no idea you prepared for this. And now she's going to find out what she never cared to understand." Carter kept scanning the file, his tone shifting from curiosity to deep professional respect. "You restructured the company into a trust last year, made yourself the sole beneficiary. She didn't even update her power of attorney after the wedding." "No," I said, my eyes like steel. "I made sure she didn't think she had to. I gave it to her. "And now," Carter asked, closing the folder. "Now I want the papers filed today," I instructed. "Divorce with full documentation. Let her get served before she even figures out the bank accounts are frozen." "Do you want temporary restraining orders?" Carter asked, already reaching for his legal pad. "Yes. And I want to flag the joint account immediately. She's been siphoning money, some of which came from my VA disability benefits. That qualifies for federal review." Carter stopped writing and looked at me, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Jesus, Mason, you're going scorched earth." I stood up, adjusting the bag on my shoulder. "No, I'm not destroying anything. I'm preserving what's mine." I paused, then looked Carter in the eye. She made her choice. I'm just making sure she lives with it. Carter picked up his phone. "Give me 2 hours." I nodded. "I'll be back. Keep everything confidential." I turned without another word, walked out of the office, and stepped into the afternoon sun like a man not recovering from surgery, but rising from a battlefield. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was the first move on a board Elena never realized she was playing. By the time the sun began to slip behind the skyline, the house I once called home had already begun its transformation from a space of warmth and shared memories to a calculated fortress that no longer belonged to Elena Cross. The locksmith arrived within hours of my meeting with Carter. I didn't wait for permission or explanations. Every lock on every door was replaced. The garage opener was reprogrammed. The home security system, once installed with Elena's specific preferences in mind, was reset entirely. The passcode she had chosen, her birthday of course, was erased from the system forever. I called the alarm company myself and had her listed as unauthorized access. No notifications, no warnings, just silence and precision, one step at a time. I moved through the house with deliberate ease, removing the keys she had duplicated, collecting the spare sets, and changing out the hidden lockbox codes. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a transition, a systematic removal of her presence, one she would never see coming until the key failed to turn. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkouds the best memories on Maidlin Williste Fkepton. Next came the finances, the invisible arteries that kept Elena's lifestyle pumping. The joint checking account, once a shared resource we built together, was frozen within 10 minutes of my request at the bank. I moved the remaining $23,000 into a private account Elena had never known existed. I'd opened it months ago under a separate trust name, quietly redirecting dividend payouts and service income, anticipating a rainy day that had finally turned into a storm. The banker, a woman in her 50s with kind, knowing eyes, barely blinked when I explained the need for immediate restriction of Elena's access. "She's been using the card like it's bottomless," I said calmly, signing the authorization forms. "She hasn't checked the balance today, but she will." The banker nodded, printed out a confirmation form, and handed it to me with quiet respect. "You're not the first," she said softly, sliding the paper across the polished mahogany. "But you might be the most prepared." "Not prepared," I replied, tucking the receipt into my jacket pocket. "Just done pretending." After that, I made one more call to the luxury dealership where Elena's beloved SUV had been leased under my name. She always boasted to her friends that it was hers. Loved to talk about the leather seats and backup cameras, as if she paid for them herself. But I knew better. I had negotiated the buyback clause when we signed the lease, a standard precaution I took with assets. And now, with a single signature and a scan of my ID sent via secure email, the dealership agreed to send a team to collect the vehicle that same afternoon. No notice to her, no confrontation, just gone. The driveway would be empty before she even realized she needed a ride. It was a surgical removal of the status symbols she valued more than her marriage. By early evening, I stood across the street in the passenger seat of Carter's black SUV, the tinted windows rolling up the world, sipping a coffee slowly as I watched the final act of the day unfold. Elena walked up the driveway first, followed closely by Justin Pierce, her smug affair partner. They looked relaxed, confident, maybe even happy, likely coming from a lunch paid for with money she didn't realize she no longer had. She reached into her purse, pulled out her key, and inserted it into the door. It didn't turn. She tried again, jiggling it with increasing force. Nothing. A moment passed. Confusion crept across her face, visible even from this distance. Justin stepped forward, tried his own key, probably a spare she'd given him weeks ago. Also, Useless. Elena knocked, then banged on the wood. Her voice rose, shrill and demanding. "Mason, open the door. This isn't funny." I didn't move. Carter handed me the coffee. "You good?" he asked, watching them with a grimace. I nodded once, fully in control. "Let her scream," I murmured. Justin's voice joined in now, louder, frustrated. "Yo, man, come on. Don't make this a thing. We're not here to fight." I took another sip. I didn't look angry. I didn't even look interested. I looked finished. Elena's knocking became pounding. Her tone shifted from anger to panic. She turned to Justin, gesturing wildly. "My card was declined at the gas station earlier," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet street, panic edging into her tone. Justin's card, too. She couldn't understand the totality of it yet. "Mason, please." Carter looked at the empty driveway where her SUV used to sit. "They noticed the car is gone," he noted. Justin was staring at the empty spot, checking his phone, probably trying to figure out if it had been towed. I set the empty coffee cup down in the console and turned to Carter. "Let's go." As the SUV pulled away from the curb, I looked back one last time. Elena had collapsed on the porch, shoulders shaking. Justin stood off to the side, face lit by the screen of his phone, looking lost. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I simply watched. Then I turned forward, eyes clear, voice steady. Checkmate. There were no raised voices from my side, no thrown objects, no final arguments, just quiet, absolute removal. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was reclamation. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one holding the board. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkoud's the best memories on Maidlin Williste Fkepton. The morning after the lockout, I sat on the patio of a quiet downtown hotel, watching the world move on without me. The sun rose clean and golden between the high-rise buildings, casting long shadows across the pavement where people passed with coffees in hand and earbuds in, all chasing their daily routine. For the first time in days, I felt nothing. No sting, no ache, just a profound stillness that came when the anger was finally gone and only purpose remained. My phone buzzed on the glass table. Once, then again, then a third time. 10 missed calls from Elena Cross. 5 from an unknown number. A voicemail notification popped up. I didn't listen. I already knew exactly what the voice would say. Confusion, excuses, maybe fake concern laced with panic. None of it mattered now. Instead of answering, I flipped open my laptop and logged into the secure client portal Carter Brooks had set up for me. Everything was lined up perfectly. The divorce papers were filed. The petition for a temporary restraining order was filed, supported by video footage pulled directly from the home security system. Yes, I had reviewed the recordings. She hadn't even bothered to close the blinds. The camera in the hallway caught it all. Her laughter, the bed shifting, the betrayal made real in cold, digital timestamps. The footage would speak for itself in court, but it had already spoken loud enough to me. Next, I reviewed the documents for the civil suit. Elena had withdrawn thousands from our joint savings account over the last several months. Money I had quietly moved back and forth while preparing my financial exit. What made it worse, and legally actionable, was the fact that a portion of that money came directly from my military disability benefits, federal VA-protected funds. Elena had either ignored that detail or didn't care, assuming I would never audit the accounts. Either way, it gave me the green light to file for fraud and potential felony-level misappropriation. If she returned the money, it would be handled civilly. If she didn't, it would become criminal. I didn't care which path it took. The outcome would be the same. She would lose. But that wasn't all. I clicked into another folder and opened the email draft I had been crafting since 3 a.m. It was addressed to the Title IX office and the Office of Academic Integrity at the local university where Elena worked part-time in administration and where Justin Pierce, her affair partner, held a tenured faculty position. The message was concise, formal, and backed with undeniable documentation. I attached screenshots of Elena's calendar entries showing personal time taken during work hours, location data that placed her at Justin's office or faculty housing during those exact windows, and receipts. Gas, food, and even a short-term rental payment, all charged to the joint account. The implication was clear and devastating. A faculty member engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a university staffer, both using school hours and resources to facilitate it. It wasn't just a scandal. It was policy violation territory. I attached the evidence in a zipped file and clicked send. Less than 2 hours later, I received a response. Thank you for your report. This matter has been forwarded to the Office of Academic Integrity and Human Resources for immediate review. That was enough. I didn't need to see the fallout personally. I just needed to know the first domino had tipped. Later that day, Elena sent a text, her desperation bleeding through the screen. Please, can we just talk? Everything's gotten out of control. We didn't mean to hurt you like this. I almost laughed aloud in the empty hotel room. They hadn't meant to hurt me. They just hadn't thought I would fight back. They'd expected quiet collapse, a man too stunned and broken to retaliate. Instead, they got silence and strategy. They got a man who understood patience better than they understood desire. A man who knew that real damage didn't come from shouting matches in the driveway. It came from precision. Justin Pierce would soon be facing an internal investigation that would threaten everything he had built. His name was already flagged in the financial trail Elena left behind. Transfers from their joint account to Justin's Venmo. Some labeled as thank you or getaway weekend. Rookie mistakes. Traceable ones. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. I needed truth. And the truth, when organized into affidavits, timestamps, and policy violations, spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. By nightfall, the storm was no longer inside me. It had moved outside, into courtrooms, into inboxes, into HR departments and compliance offices. I simply sat in silence, drinking black coffee, reading the final line of the university's follow-up email one more time. If confirmed, disciplinary action may include suspension or termination. That would do. The board was still moving, but the game was no longer in their hands. They were playing defense now, and they didn't even know the rules. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkoud's the best memories on Maidlin Williste Fkepton. The Sunday afternoon air was heavy with the kind of suburban stillness that tried to appear serene, but always felt staged to me. I pulled into the driveway of the Cross residence, taking in the meticulously trimmed hedges, the porch decor that changed for every micro-season, and a mailbox that probably hadn't seen a late bill in 20 years. I stepped out of the car in a dark button-down and slacks, carrying nothing but a slim charcoal folder tucked under my arm. There was no fanfare, no ceremony, just cold purpose. This house belonged to Henry and Margaret Cross, Elena's parents, people who had spent 12 years offering me polite smiles dipped in condescension. Margaret had once told me at Thanksgiving, with her wine glass hovering just above judgment, "You're not exactly the man we prayed for, Mason, but at least you pay the bill." Today, I was going to show them exactly who paid the bills. The door opened before I could even knock. Elena stood there, not in her usual polished attire, but in worn jeans and a t-shirt that didn't match the image she had so carefully cultivated. Her face paled the moment she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her eyes darting to the street. My voice was calm, even. "I brought something for your parents." Margaret appeared in the doorway behind her daughter like a ghost summoned by tension. Her eyes narrowed, and the familiar smirk formed on her lips. "Oh, the ghost returns," she said, clutching her cardigan. "I assumed you were still hiding." I didn't flinch. "May I come in?" Elena hesitated, blocking the way. But Margaret tilted her head, her curiosity piqued by my audacity. "It's fine, Elena. Let the man speak. Maybe he's finally come to apologize." They led me to the living room, where Henry sat in his leather recliner, flipping half-heartedly through a golf magazine. He barely looked up. I remained standing. 5 minutes, Elena muttered, crossing her arms defensively. "Less," I promised. I placed the folder on the glass coffee table, opened it slowly, and pulled out the first document. It was a printed spreadsheet detailing $3,827 in unauthorized withdrawals from the joint account I had once shared with Elena. The rows included timestamps, transaction notes, and one particular transfer labeled Weekend Cabin sent directly to Justin Pierce's Venmo. "This," I said, looking directly at Henry, "is what your daughter did with our savings." I didn't wait for a reaction. I set the next paper down. It was an email printout from the university's Office of Academic Integrity, confirming an open investigation into Justin Pierce and Elena Cross for inappropriate workplace conduct. They used school property, school hours, and your daughter's position in administration to make this affair more convenient, I explained, sliding the paper toward Margaret without breaking eye contact. "It's already been escalated to HR," Justin is likely looking at tenure revocation. The third document was the one that drew the most silence. A copy of the new deed to the home Elena thought she still had rights to. I pointed to the notarized transfer of ownership dated 3 weeks before she had been locked out. The house was legally sold to a private buyer, I said. Brian Cole, my cousin. He leased it back to me short-term under a private agreement. That means every night Elena spent there after I changed the locks, she was legally trespassing. Margaret's face twisted, her composure cracking. "You're bluffing," she spat. "You couldn't sell the house without her." "I could," I corrected, "because the deed was never in her name. Just the mortgage she didn't pay." Elena began to tremble, her arms folding tighter against her chest as if to hold herself together. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she said quietly, her voice shaking. I raised a brow. "Good. Then you'll understand I'm also filing to recover the missing funds, and I've documented the misuse of VA disability benefits. That's a federal felony, Elena, not a civil dispute." Then came the final document. I placed it on the table like a closing argument. One single sheet, a mortgage assistance cancellation notice. "This is what I stopped paying last week," I said, addressing Margaret and Henry directly for the first time. "For the past 18 months, I've been quietly covering your monthly mortgage payments because Elena said you were struggling." I never said a word. "I planned to surprise you with a complete payoff in December." I shrugged, a gesture devoid of sympathy. But things change. Margaret's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer horror. Henry dropped the magazine onto the floor, his mouth opening but finding no words. Elena's eyes welled with something that looked like regret, but I didn't care. "For 12 years, I said, my voice low and razor-sharp, cutting through the silence of the room. I showed up. I worked. I protected your daughter's reputation. I paid the bills. I defended her when no one else did. And in return, I came home from the hospital and found her with another man in my bed." I turned to Margaret. "And you. You encouraged it. You never thought I measured up. So now I'm finally living down to your expectations." I closed the folder and tucked it back under my arm. As I turned and walked to the door, voices erupted behind me. Elena pleading, Margaret sobbing, Henry shouting something about a misunderstanding. I didn't turn around. I opened the door myself, stepped outside into the fresh air, and closed it behind me without a sound. It wasn't revenge. It was justice served, not with fury, but with facts. Not with yelling, but with truth. I didn't need them to like me. I only needed them to understand that everything they once looked down on had now risen above them. The silence that followed as I walked to my car was louder than any confrontation could ever be. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkoud's the best memories on Maidlin Williste Fkepton. Weeks passed, and I, Mason Gray, didn't say a word. Not to Elena Cross. Not to anyone in a rapidly shrinking world. I didn't need to. The consequences of her choices had already started unraveling, one loose thread at a time, pulling apart the delicate illusion she had built around herself. It began with the eviction notice. Elena had ignored the initial warning sent by my lawyer, likely assuming my coldness was temporary or that the house was still hers by some twisted logic of entitlement. But when 2 sheriff's deputies arrived in uniform, posted the order publicly on the front door, and gave her 24 hours to vacate, reality hit like a physical slap. Neighbors watched from behind twitching blinds as she pleaded, cried, and ultimately packed her things in silence. Justin Pierce wasn't there to help her carry the boxes. He had his own disaster to manage, a firestorm that I had ignited with a single email. The university acted faster than anyone, even I, had expected. The Title IX report I filed, complete with documentation of Elena and Justin's involvement during working hours and on school property, had triggered a full internal review. The emails, time logs, and payment receipts I had quietly collected were more than enough to prompt immediate disciplinary action. Justin was suspended immediately pending the investigation, but the writing was on the wall. Within days, his tenure was rescinded. The board issued a brief, scathing statement citing violations of academic ethics and misuse of university resources. His pension, which he had once bragged was locked in for a comfortable retirement, was stripped due to the violation of the morality clause in his contract. And when the screenshots surfaced, photos of Elena and Justin together during work hours, some sent from university servers, the faculty message boards lit up with shock and condemnation. But the final, fatal blow to his life didn't come from the university. It came from Laura Pierce, Justin's wife. She hadn't known. Not really. Not until she received a plain manila envelope in the mail, sent anonymously, of course. Inside were beach selfies, payment receipts for hotels, and one particularly cruel text message printed from Elena's phone backup. He makes me feel alive again, unlike her. Laura filed for divorce the following week, taking the house and the kids. As for Elena, the spiral continued downward with brutal speed. Her parents, Margaret and Henry Cross, refused to answer her calls. The humiliation from my visits still echoed through their social circles. With me no longer quietly paying their mortgage, they were scrambling to save their own home, leaving no room to harbor a daughter who had caused their financial ruin. Margaret stopped attending her country club luncheons, unable to face the whispers. Henry withdrew from his weekly golf group. They were pariahs, and they blamed Elena entirely. Isolated and broke, Elena moved in with a former coworker temporarily, before settling for a cramped one-bedroom apartment near a noisy shopping plaza. And then came the job search. With her reputation at the university shattered, administrative roles were out of reach. She eventually landed the only job she could get, a retail position at a home goods store. It was the same kind of job she used to mock publicly when we were married. That's what you do when you have no ambition. She once posted about a sales clerk. Now she wore the uniform, scanned barcodes, and smiled through gritted teeth at customers who reminded her of who she used to be. Still, old habits die hard. Elena tried to rewrite the narrative one last time. On social media, she cast herself as the survivor. She posted vague, artistic quotes about emotional abuse, gaslighting, and healing. She shared blurry selfies with tearful captions, hinting that I was a monster who had abandoned her. She claimed I had cut her off without compassion and used my military influence to ruin her life. People, some friends, some strangers who loves a tragedy, sent supportive comments, heart emojis, and words of encouragement. For a moment, she almost had them. She almost controlled the story. Until I replied, I didn't use my real name. I created a burner account with a generic profile picture. One comment, one question posted beneath one of her most emotional status updates about betrayal. I wrote, "Didn't you mock your disabled husband while he was in the hospital recovering from heart surgery, all while sleeping with your affair partner in his bed? Curious if that detail is in your next post too." The comment gained traction instantly. Dozens of likes. Then hundreds. People started asking questions. Is this true? Wait, what happened? Friends who knew us vaguely began to piece it together. They unfollowed her. Some deleted her entirely. The carefully curated image Elena had clung to. Glossy, broken, misunderstood, crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth. I never replied again. I didn't need to. I watched it all unfold from a distance, never once stepping forward to gloat. No press releases, no phone calls, no revenge fantasies played out in public. Just silence. Purposeful, sharp, complete silence. I wasn't celebrating her downfall. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was simply done. And Elena, she was finally, truly alone. Not the kind of loneliness you feel after a fight, but the hollow, echoing kind that settles in when you realize you've burned every bridge, exhausted every lie, and now stand alone in the ashes of what you built. I didn't forgive her. I never said I would, but I didn't destroy her either. She did that all on her own. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkoud's the best memories on Maidlin Williste Fkepton. 1 year later, I, Mason Gray, woke to the quiet, rhythmic lapping of lake water against the wooden dock outside my cabin. The air was cool, crisp, and washed in the early hues of soft gold and blue. Birds sang from the pines, a gentle melody that belonged to places untouched by chaos and deception. The cabin was modest. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen that smelled of cedar and coffee, and a stone fireplace that crackled faithfully through the winter nights. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't a status symbol, but it was mine. Tucked on the edge of a small lake near the VA hospital, it offered everything I needed and nothing I didn't. I went fishing some mornings, standing knee-deep in the mist. Not because I expected to catch anything worth mounting on a wall, but because the stillness did something for my soul that noise never could. Some afternoons, I volunteered, helping fellow veterans navigate the labyrinth of paperwork, housing applications, or just sitting with them while they talked about the weight they still carried. I understood that kind of weight better than most now. It wasn't just the weight of war. It was the weight of betrayal, of coming home to a life that had turned into a stranger. With the help of Carter Brooks, who had stood by me through every legal maneuver, I had launched a nonprofit organization 6 months ago. It was a quiet but powerful initiative aimed at helping military families secure legal representation, temporary housing, and emergency funds during crises. It was funded in part by donations, in part by my own resources, but primarily by one consistent, ironic deposit: $5,231.90. It was transferred like clockwork on the first of every month. Court-ordered restitution. It was Elena Cross's signature repayment for the money she took from our shared account, some of which had included my protected VA disability benefits. I never touched a dime of that money for personal use. Every cent went directly into the nonprofit. It wasn't out of spite. It was out of purpose. I believed in that now more than ever. Something broken had to become something useful. I remember Carter calling me just last week, his voice sounding satisfied over the line. "The deposit cleared again, Mason," he had said. She tried to petition for a reduction based on her income at the retail store. The judge denied it, said the repayment schedule stands until the debt is cleared. I had smiled then, looking out at the water. "Let it stand, Carter. It's doing good work here." We just put a deposit down on an apartment for a Marine and his daughter. Carter had paused, his tone shifting to something softer. "You know, most men would have burned that money or bought a sports car to flaunt it. You're turning her mistakes into someone else's miracle." "That's the point," I told him. "She took from a veteran. Now she's paying them back. It's the only balance that matters." People sometimes asked if I missed her. If, in the quiet moments between the casting of a line and the setting of the sun, I thought about what could have been, I always gave the same answer. I don't miss her. I miss who I thought she was. I hadn't seen Elena since that day in her parents' living room, her face pale and trembling as I laid the documents on the table. I had no idea where she was now, and truthfully, I didn't care to know. The restitution continued, but her voice, her image, her chaos, none of it followed me here. She had tried to reach out once early on through her attorney, offering a settlement that included a non-disclosure agreement. Carter had handled it with a single rejection letter. I never responded. There was nothing left to say. I held no hatred. That surprised even me. For a long time, I'd imagined I would carry rage for years, that I'd replay the betrayal like a film on loop, unable to let it go. But standing on the dock that morning, watching the mist curl off the water like smoke, I realized something profound. Hatred is a chain. Forgiveness isn't always a gift you give the other person. It's the bolt cutter that frees you from their grip. I didn't forgive Elena in the traditional sense. I didn't excuse her. I didn't justify what she did, but I released her. I let her go, not with mercy, but with finality. Inside the cabin, the nonprofit's latest report sat printed on the dining table. 5 families assisted this quarter. One veteran reunited with his kids after a bitter custody fight. Another received emergency shelter after eviction. I read through the names slowly, quietly proud. None of them would ever know the story behind the funding. They didn't need to know that their safety was paid for by the downfall of a woman who thought she could destroy a soldier. That wasn't the point. Later that day, I took a walk down the gravel trail behind the cabin, stopping at a small wooden bench that faced the water. The breeze was gentle, smelling of pine and damp earth. My heart was steady. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking backward. People often mistake silence for weakness. They assume peace means surrender. But I knew better. I had been the quietest man in the room, and I had won. Not through revenge, but through clarity. Not through violence, but through truth. This wasn't revenge. This was closure. And closure, when earned, is the loudest silence of all. Some betrayals don't deserve confrontation. They deserve consequences. My story, Mason Gray's story, reminds us that strength isn't always loud, and dignity isn't something others can strip away unless we let them. In silence, I reclaimed my life. In strategy, I protected my peace. And in walking away without looking back, I taught myself this: healing begins not when they apologize, but when we stop waiting for it. Closure isn't revenge. It's choosing yourself without needing their permission. So if you've ever been broken, remember this: You don't have to burn down their house. You just have to stop letting them live in yours. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.